The herbs were almost gone. Wren Calloway pressed the torn pouch to her chest and counted what was left. 3 crushed leaves, maybe 4, enough for one more morning. Outside, the festival roared. She could hear it through the stone. Drums, laughter, 1,000 voices lifting toward the moon. All of them celebrating, none of them looking for her. That was the only thing that had ever kept her alive. For as long as she could remember, she had stayed in the spaces no one watched. The back stairwells, the empty libraries, the corners where a girl could disappear if she breathed quietly enough. Year after year of swallowing bitter tea so the world would forget she existed. But tonight, the air felt wrong. Tonight, something was moving through the palace, slow, patient, certain. She couldn't name it. She only knew her body had gone cold, the way it always did a heartbeat before everything changed. She closed her fist around the last of the leaves, and somewhere across the crowded halls, a man who had spent nearly a decade chasing a scent that always vanished lifted his head. Because for the first time, it hadn't. The lanterns came alive all at once. One breath, the city was dark, and the next, it was glowing. 1,000 small flames rising into the night, like the stars had decided to come down and walk among the people. The Moon Festival had begun. Music spilled through the streets of Blackpine. Drums, laughter. The bright ring of glasses lifted in celebration. Every window glowed gold, and every doorway poured out warmth and noise, and the smell of roasted honey and spiced wine. It was the one night of the year when everyone wanted to be seen. Everyone but her. Wren Calloway moved along the eastern edge of the palace grounds with her head lowered and her shoulders drawn in. Her plain gray dress melted into the crowd of servants and attendants hurrying through the corridors. No jewels, no ribbons, nothing that might catch the light or catch an eye. That was the whole point. She had spent so long learning how to be forgettable that it had stopped feeling like a skill and started feeling like a skin. Something she lived inside, something she could not take off. She slipped through a narrow side door into the palace library, and the heavy quiet folded around her like a blanket. Here the festival became a distant hum. Here she could breathe. The room smelled of old paper and cedar and dust warmed by candlelight. Shelves rose into shadow above her. Somewhere a clock ticked softly, patient and slow. Wren locked the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed, letting the noise of the world drain away. Then she reached into the worn leather satchel at her side. Her fingers found the small cloth pouch by memory. She had made the same motion 1,000 times. Open the pouch, crush the dried leaves, add the water, drink. The herbs had a name passed down quietly, never spoken too loudly. They masked what she was. They hid the thing inside her that the world had taught her to fear. She crushed a small handful into a chipped ceramic cup. A faint, earthy scent rose into the air, bitter and green. Steam curled as she poured the hot water in, and for a heartbeat, her reflection trembled on the surface. Pale skin, tired eyes, a face that looked older than it had any right to look. She was 22. She had been hiding since she was 14. 8 years of bitter tea. 8 years of back stairwells and empty rooms, and the careful art of vanishing before anyone could look too closely. 8 years of pretending to be no one at all. She lifted the cup and drank. The taste clung to her tongue, sharp and unpleasant, the way it always did. But within minutes, the herbs would do their work, and the scent she carried would fade back into nothing, and she could disappear again. That was the only freedom she had ever known. A knock landed on the door. Wren nearly dropped the cup. "Wren," came a bright, familiar voice. "Are you hiding in here again?" "Tamsin." Wren let out a slow breath, set the cup behind a stack of ledgers, and unlocked the door. Tamsin spilled inside, arms full of festival papers, cheeks flushed from the cold and the excitement. "I knew it," Tamsin said, beaming. "Everyone in the entire kingdom is out there dancing, and you are in here, talking to books." "Someone has to keep the records straight," Wren said. "On festival night?" "Especially on festival night." Tamsin rolled her eyes and dropped the papers onto a table. "One day I am going to drag you out there myself. You will dance. You will laugh. You might even let someone see your face." Wren managed a smile, but it faded the moment Tamsin turned away. Because if Tamsin knew the truth, she would understand exactly why crowds were dangerous, why every gathering of wolves felt like standing in an open field during a storm, why one wrong moment, one torn pouch, one breath of air could end everything. Tamsin chattered on about the dancers and the visiting nobles, and Wren let the words wash over her without really hearing them. Her gaze drifted toward the tall window at the far end of the room. Beyond the glass, the whole city shimmered. Thousands of lanterns, thousands of faces. Somewhere out there, alphas and nobles laughed beneath the moon, certain of their place in the world. And somewhere within these very walls moved the one man she had spent her whole life learning to avoid, the Alpha King. She had seen him only a handful of times, always from a great distance, always with her heart climbing into her throat. Each time she had felt the same impossible thing, as if his eyes, even from across a courtyard, could somehow strip away every layer she had so carefully built. A horn sounded across the city, long, deep, triumphant. Then another. Tamsin gasped and ran to the window. "He is here. The king is back." The cheering outside swelled into a roar, and deep in Wren's chest, something turned cold. Not fear, exactly. Something older than fear. A warning, low and certain, the kind her body had learned to trust long before her mind ever caught up. The same feeling that had saved her, again and again, in all the years she had spent running. Tonight it whispered the same word it always whispered: run. Far across the palace, where crystal light poured down from high ceilings, and the marble floors gleamed like still water, Lucian Thornwood stood alone in a quiet hall and stared at the moon through a tall, arched window. He should have been thinking about the celebration waiting beyond the doors, the speeches, the alliances, the 100 careful conversations a king was expected to carry on a night like this. He was thinking about none of them. 8 years. The number rose in his mind, the way it always did when the moon was full. 8 years since the scent first reached him. It had come to him during a storm in the high country, carried on a single gust of wind, soft, warm, impossible to name and impossible to forget. It had lasted only a breath before the wind took it away. He had told himself it was nothing. Then it had come again. A season later, a great distance away, gone before he could turn his head, and again, always for a moment, always just out of reach. Most men would have let it go, Lucian had never been able to. He remembered every place, every season, every fleeting trace of it. Over the years, the scent had stopped being a curiosity and become a question he could not lay down. A locked door he had spent the better part of a decade standing in front of, waiting for someone to finally reach for the handle from the other side. The doors behind him opened. "Your Majesty." Lucian did not turn. He knew the voice. Garrick Vale, his oldest advisor, steady as stone. "The hall is ready," Garrick said. "They are waiting for you." "I know." A pause. "You seem somewhere else tonight." Lucian let out a slow breath, his gaze still fixed on the moon. "Does it ever feel to you," he said quietly, "like the night is holding its breath?" Garrick studied him for a long moment. The scent again. It was not a question. Lucian's jaw tightened. "It is closer than it has ever been." "You cannot know that." "I can feel it." He finally turned and his pale eyes caught the light. "Something is here, Garrick. Tonight. I have chased a ghost on the wind for so long, and tonight the wind has stopped moving." Garrick frowned, uneasy. "And if she does not wish to be found?" For just a moment, something flickered across the king's face. Uncertainty. It was gone, almost before it appeared. "Then there is a reason," he said softly. "No one hides for so long without a reason." Beyond the doors, the music rose. The cheering swelled. And in two different corners of the same palace, two people who had never spoken a single word to each other felt the exact same thing at the exact same moment. A pull, a nearness, a sense that the long, careful distance between them was finally, quietly, beginning to close. Wren set down her empty cup and looked toward the door. The summons came an hour later. Tamsin returned in a rush, breathless, a tray of sealed invitations balanced in both hands, and an apology already written across her face. "Wren, please do not be angry with me." Wren looked up slowly from the ledgers. Something in her stomach had already begun to tighten. "What did you do?" "3 of the attendants fell ill. The hall is short of hands, and the steward is in a panic." Tamsin pushed the tray toward her like a peace offering. "Someone has to carry these to the West gathering room, and someone volunteered your name." Wren felt the floor tilt beneath her. "No," she said quietly. "It is only a short walk." Tamsin's voice softened. "You hand them out. You keep your head down. You slip away. Nobody ever looks twice at a girl with a tray. You taught me that yourself." That was true. That was the cruel little joke of it. Wren stared at the invitations, at the gleaming wax seals, at the bright, busy, dangerous world that waited just beyond the safety of the library door. Every part of her wanted to refuse. But refusal drew attention too. A servant who would not serve became a story, and a story became a question, and a question in a palace full of wolves was the most dangerous thing of all. So she breathed in, and she took the tray, and for the first time in a very long while, Wren Calloway walked willingly into the light. The corridors of the palace had become a river of color. Silk gowns brushed past polished marble. Jewels caught the chandelier light and threw it back in tiny sparks. Musicians played somewhere out of sight, and the music drifted through the halls like smoke, soft and golden and everywhere at once. The air was thick with it. Wine, roses, warm candle wax. The heavy perfumes of 100 noble families, all blended together into a cloud so rich it made her head swim. Wren kept her eyes down and her steps small. Deliver the invitations, avoid the crowd, return to the dark. Simple. She held that thought the way a person holds a candle in a storm, cupping it close, guarding the flame. One hall, then another. The doors of the west gathering room glowed at the far end of the corridor, almost within reach. Almost. And then a child came around the corner at a dead run. He could not have been more than 8 years old. All knees and elbows and bright, reckless laughter, chasing another boy through the forest of legs and skirts. He never saw her. He simply slammed into her side, hard, and the world came apart in slow motion. The tray tipped, the invitations scattered like white birds across the marble. "Oh," Wren gasped, dropping at once to her knees. "I am sorry," the boy blurted, eyes huge. "I did not see you. I am sorry." "It is all right," she said quickly, already gathering the papers with both hands. "It is all right. Go on, go find your friend." But he knelt to help instead, the way kind children do. So did she, and as she stretched to reach a single invitation that had slid beneath a nearby chair, her satchel swung against the chair leg. The old buckle gave way. Time slowed. She heard it before she felt it. The soft thud of the cloth pouch striking the marble, then the small, terrible sound of old fabric splitting along a seam, and then the smell. Dried leaves spilled across the floor in a little green fan, and that earthy, bitter scent lifted into the air all around her, unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were breathing. Wren froze. The blood drained from her face. No, not here. Not now. She lunged for the herbs, sweeping them toward her body with shaking hands, trying to gather them, hide them, undo it. The boy stared at her, bewildered by the sudden change in her. "Miss?" She barely heard him. Her pulse had become a drum in her ears, fast and frantic, because the spilled herbs were not the real danger. The real danger was what happened once they were gone. And already she could feel it, a faint loosening behind her ribs, a slow warmth rising beneath her skin, blooming outward like heat from a banked fire. It was the feeling of a wall beginning to crack from the inside, the feeling of a door, sealed for years, swinging gently open on its hinges. The mask was slipping. "There you are!" The voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. Wren looked up. A woman stood over her, tall, elegant, draped in deep wine-colored silk that pooled around her feet like spilled darkness. She had sharp, clever eyes that seemed to catalog everything they touched, and a stillness about her that made the very air feel heavier. Lady Cordelia Vane. Wren knew the name the way every servant knows the names of the people who could unmake them with a single word. Cordelia rarely spoke to attendants. She had never had a reason to. Yet now her entire attention was fixed on Wren and on the small green leaves scattered across the gleaming floor. Cordelia's chin lifted just slightly. Her nostrils flared. "What is that scent?" Wren rose to her feet, clutching the torn pouch against her stomach as if it could still protect her. "It is nothing, my lady. A personal remedy. Nothing more." "A remedy." Cordelia stepped closer, and the silk whispered around her ankles. "For what ailment, exactly?" The question hung in the air between them. Wren reached for an answer. Any answer at all. But before a single word could form, A young nobleman drifted over, pulled in by the small commotion the way moths are pulled toward a lamp. He bent down, plucked one of the leaves from the floor, and turned it slowly in the candlelight. His expression shifted. "Wait," he said. "These are concealment herbs." A few nearby heads turned. Cordelia's eyes narrowed to bright, interested slits. "Concealment. My family keeps something similar for long journeys through the high country," the nobleman went on, frowning at the leaf. "But these are not the common kind. These are far rarer." He looked up at Wren with new and deeply unwelcome interest. "This is moonroot." The word dropped into the corridor like a stone into still water, and the ripples spread fast. Moonroot? Did he say moonroot? Why on earth would a serving girl carry moonroot? More guests slowed. More heads turned. The open space around Wren began to shrink with every passing breath. The crowd quietly leaning in, drawing closer, the way crowds always do when they sense that something is about to break wide open. The thing she had buried for so long stirred, just for a breath, rising toward the surface. She pressed the last of the leaves to her mouth and swallowed hard, and felt the warmth recede, barely, just enough. Not gone, only held. A door pushed shut again with the whole weight of her body, and already straining at the hinges. "I should return to my duties," she said, and her voice came out thinner than she wanted it to. She turned to leave. Cordelia shifted sideways, just enough to block her path. The movement was small. It was also absolutely deliberate. One moment. The corridor had gone quiet around them now. The music still played somewhere far away, faint and golden. But here, in this small circle of marble and silk and candle flame, the world had narrowed to a single held breath. "You seem nervous," Cordelia observed, tilting her head like a bird studying something on the ground. "And most attendants do not carry rare herbs sewn carefully into the lining of their satchels." "Please," Wren whispered, "let me pass." "Why?" Cordelia's voice went soft, almost tender, which was somehow far worse than cruelty. "What is it about yourself that you are so very afraid to let anyone see?" And that was the exact question Wren had spent her entire life running from. From the shadowed edge of the gathering, a man she had not noticed was watching her. He stood apart from the rest, one shoulder against a marble column, a glass of dark wine forgotten in his hand. He was handsome in a cold and careful way, the kind of handsome that never quite reached the eyes. And while everyone else stared at Wren with simple curiosity, he was studying her, slowly, patiently, the way a hunter studies tracks in fresh snow. His name was Royce Calder, and the moment the word moonroot left the nobleman's lips, something behind his pale, still expression had quietly sharpened. He did not lean in with the others. He did not whisper. He simply watched and remembered and waited, as if he had just heard the answer to a question he had been carrying for a very long time. Wren did not see him. She was already drowning in too many other eyes. Several floors away, in a hall of golden light and murmured politics, the Alpha King stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. A nobleman had been talking to him about trade, about roads and tariffs and the long winter pressing down from the mountains. Lucian had been listening with the practiced half of his mind, the half a king learns to lend to dull conversations while the rest of him roams free. The other half had been somewhere else entirely. And then it came. Faint, fleeting, so thin he might almost have imagined it. But he did not imagine it. It moved through the heavy air like a thread of warmth drawn through a cold room, and every nerve in his body went perfectly still at once. The voices around him dimmed into a distant, meaningless hum. The wine glass in his hand stopped halfway to the table. He knew that scent. He had known it for 8 years. Soft, warm, impossibly, achingly his. It had reached him on storm winds in the high passes and across wide mountain valleys, always for a single breath, always vanishing before he could turn his head. He had built 100 fragile memories around it, and lost every one of them to the wind. And now it was here, inside these walls, close enough to touch. "Your Majesty?" the nobleman asked. Lucian did not answer him. Garrick was at his side in an instant, reading the change in his king the way only an old and trusted friend ever could. "What is it?" Lucian set the glass down without once looking at it. His pale eyes had locked onto the far doors of the hall, onto the dark corridor beyond them, as if he could see straight through solid stone. "She is here," he breathed. "Lucian!" "She is here." His voice was low and certain and threaded through with something that had no proper name. "Right now, in this palace, after all this time." And then the scent flickered and began to fade. Something cold and terrible dropped through the center of his chest. A decade of arriving a moment too late. A decade of reaching for a door that always swung shut before his fingers could brush the handle. Not again. Not tonight. The king moved. He crossed the hall without a single word, and the crowd parted before him the way water parts around a stone dropped into a river. Nobles turned. Conversations died on the vine. Garrick hurried to keep pace at his shoulder, and behind them, a low murmur of confusion rose and rippled outward through the room. Lucian heard none of it. He followed the fading thread of warmth through the corridors, faster with every step, his heart hammering against years of swallowed disappointment, toward a small, tight knot of guests gathered at the edge of the west halls, toward a voice he had never once heard, toward the center of everything he had ever wanted and never been able to name. Back in the corridor, the circle of guests had grown. Wren stood trapped at its very center, the torn pouch pressed flat to her chest, dozens of curious eyes crawling over her as if she were a strange puzzle laid open on a table for them all to solve. Whispers slid through the crowd like cold water. Theories, suspicions, the hungry, restless energy of people who have caught the scent of a secret and decided they would very much like to own it. Why would anyone need to hide their scent? Who is she, really? She is no ordinary serving girl. Look at the way she holds herself. Wren's breath came shallow and quick. The warmth she had swallowed down was straining again, pushing back against the last thin wall, and she could feel the change waiting just beneath her skin like a tide held behind a failing dam. She had built a wall so high and so smooth that no one could ever see over the top of it, and now it was beginning to crumble, here, in front of strangers, all at once. "Please," she said again, and this time the words cracked down the middle. "I only want to go." "Stop," Cordelia commanded, not loudly, just finally. And then the air changed. It was not a sound. It was a feeling. A sudden shift in the weight of the room, like the held silence before a storm breaks, the strange hush that falls when even the birds go still. The whispers died in every throat at once. One by one, heads began to turn toward the far end of the corridor. Footsteps, slow, measured, unhurried, and somehow all the more powerful for it. The crowd began to part without anyone asking them to. Nobles straightened their spines. Even Lady Cordelia lowered her sharp chin just slightly and took one quiet step backward. Wren did not need to look to know who was coming. Her body already knew. The cold warning she had carried all night long flared up white-hot inside her, and her heart slammed against her ribs, and every single instinct she owned was screaming the same desperate word it had always screamed. Run, vanish, be no one again. But her feet would not move. The footsteps stopped. A silence fell so complete that she could hear the candle flames trembling in their sconces. And slowly, helplessly, against everything she had ever taught herself, Wren lifted her eyes. He was tall, taller than she had ever imagined from across all those distant courtyards. The candlelight caught the silver of his eyes and turned them into something almost unbearable to look upon directly. The Alpha King, Lucian Thornwood. He was not looking at the crowd. He was not looking at Cordelia, or the scattered herbs, or the spilled invitations fanned across the floor. He was looking at her. Only her. And the very moment their eyes met, the whole roaring world went silent inside Wren's chest. The fear was still there. The panic was still there, coiled and ready. But beneath all of it, against everything she had spent her life believing, something else rose up to meet him. Something warm. Something terrifying. Something entirely new. Recognition. As if some buried, sleeping part of her had been waiting her whole life for exactly this face, for exactly this breath, for exactly this impossible moment. Lucian's own breath had stopped the instant he saw her. 8 years. 8 years of chasing a ghost across the wind. And at last, the ghost had a face. Gray-blue eyes that looked far too tired for someone so young. Soft brown hair slipping loose from its careful knot. A girl in a plain gray dress, holding a torn little pouch in front of her like a shield, looking back at him as though she fully expected him to be the end of her entire world. And the scent, faint now, dying fast behind the leaves she had swallowed, but unmistakable. It reached down into the oldest, most stubborn part of him, the part that had refused to surrender all these long years, and it whispered a single word he had never once dared to say aloud. Found. Neither of them moved. The crowd held its breath as one. Garrick stood frozen a few steps behind his king, and off in the shadows, Royce Calder watched it all unfold with the cold, patient calm of a man who had just realized the prize he wanted was about to slip into another man's hands. In the hush of that candlelit corridor, the Alpha King and the girl who had spent her whole life learning how to disappear simply looked at one another. And the careful, painstaking walls of so many years began very quietly to fall. For a long moment, no one in the corridor dared to move. The Alpha King stood at the center of 100 staring eyes, and he did not so much as glance at a single one of them. His whole world had narrowed to the trembling girl in the plain gray dress. It was Cordelia who finally found her voice. "Your Majesty," she said, dipping into a careful bow. "Forgive the disturbance. This attendant was found carrying concealment herbs. Moonroot, of all things. We were only trying to understand why. Lucian did not look at her. I understand why, he said quietly. The simple words sent a fresh ripple of whispers through the crowd. Ren's heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. He was close now, close enough that she could see the faint lines of weariness around his eyes, the kind of tiredness that came from carrying something heavy for far too long. She knew that tiredness. She had worn it herself for years. Everyone, Lucian said, and though his voice never rose, it filled the corridor completely. The festival is waiting. Go and enjoy it. It was not a request. The crowd hesitated. Then, slowly, reluctantly, it began to break apart. Nobles drifted back toward the music. Servants gathered the spilled invitations and slipped away. Whispers trailed behind them like smoke, carrying the story to every corner of the palace. But one man did not move at once. Royce Calder lingered at the edge of the thinning crowd, his dark wine still untouched in his hand, his gaze fixed on Ren with a stillness that made her skin crawl, though she did not yet know his name. Then he too turned, and as he walked away, the smallest smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was not a kind smile. When the corridor had emptied at last, only 3 people remained: the king, his advisor, and the girl who had spent her whole life trying not to be a girl anyone would remember. "Walk with me," Lucian said. Ren's hands tightened around the torn pouch. "Your Majesty, I have duties. I should—" "Walk with me," he said again, softer this time. "Please." It was the please that undid her. Kings did not say please, not to serving girls, not to anyone. And so, on legs that did not quite feel like her own, Ren followed him. He led her away from the noise, down a quieter hall, through a heavy door, and into a room she had never seen. A study, perhaps. Tall windows, a cold hearth, shelves of old books climbing into shadow. The festival became a muffled hum behind the thick stone walls, and for the first time in hours, Ren could hear herself think. Garrick stepped in behind them and quietly took up a place near the door. He had murmured her name to the king on the walk over, read from the steward's worn ledger. Ren Calloway, an attendant. No house, no history anyone had ever bothered to record. A girl the palace had filed away and forgotten, exactly as she had wished. Lucian crossed to the window and stood looking out at the lanterns far below. 8 years, he said. Ren went still. "I beg your pardon. For 8 years, a scent has come to me on the wind." He did not turn around. On mountain roads, in winter storms, in places so far apart that no living thing could have traveled between them. It would last only a breath, and then it would be gone every single time before I could find its source. Slowly, he turned to face her. And tonight, in this palace, it stopped running. Ren could not breathe. All the air had gone out of the room. "You were looking for me," she whispered. It was not a question. She already knew. She had felt it the moment their eyes met. "All this time, you were looking for me." Yes. The honesty of it struck her harder than any threat could have. There was no triumph in his voice, no hunger, only something quiet and worn and almost gentle. And that was what frightened her most of all. "You do not even know me," she said. "No?" A faint, tired smile. "But I have wondered about you for a very long time. That is not nothing." Ren looked away, Her eyes stung, and she hated that they did. "You should not have found me," she said. "No one was ever supposed to find me." Lucian studied her for a long moment. Then, instead of demanding answers, he simply lowered himself into a chair beside the cold hearth and gestured to the one across from it. "Then tell me," he said. "Help me understand. Why does a girl spend so many years teaching the whole world to forget she exists?" Ren stayed standing. For a long time, she said nothing at all. But the room was warm, and the door was guarded, and the man in the chair was not looking at her the way everyone else always had. He was not looking at her like a prize. He was looking at her like a person, and something inside her, something that had been clenched tight for longer than she could remember, began, very slowly, to loosen. "It started when she was young," Ren said at last. She did not sit, but she wrapped her arms around herself, and her gaze drifted toward the cold hearth, and her voice changed, the way a voice changes when it reaches back into a place that still hurts. There was a girl who grew up in a quiet place, far from cities, far from packs. Her mother and father were not powerful, or wealthy, or important. They were simply kind. A small, sad breath. They were happy. For a while. Lucian said nothing. He only listened. And then, one summer, the girl changed. Ren's fingers tightened against her own arms. A scent came to her. Soft. Warm. The kind of scent that powerful wolves spend their whole lives searching for. A rare thing. A wanted thing. Her jaw tightened. That was the first time she learned what it meant to be wanted. The fire of the candles flickered and shadows moved across her face. At first, she did not understand why strangers began to watch her, why certain wolves followed her with their eyes whenever she entered a room, why her parents started locking doors that had never needed locks, why they whispered to each other when they thought she was asleep. She swallowed. It was her mother who finally explained it. The girl was not in danger because she had done anything wrong. She was in danger because of what she was, because there were people in the world who would take one look at her, breathe in that rare scent, and decide that she belonged to them. Lucian's hands had gone very still on the arms of his chair. "Not love," Ren said softly. "Never love. Ownership." To them, she was not a daughter, or a friend, or a girl with a name. She was a treasure to be locked away. A trophy. A thing. Across the room, Garrick lowered his eyes. "So her father found the herbs," she went on. "Old plants, rare ones. The kind that could hide what she was, at least for a while. And her mother taught her the most important lesson of all." Her voice dropped almost to nothing. "How to disappear." She finally looked up, and her eyes were bright with everything she was trying not to feel. How to leave a place before anyone grew too curious. How to change her name when she had to. How to be quiet and small and forgettable. How to walk into a crowded room and leave no trace behind that she had ever been there at all. The candle flames swayed. "And it worked," Ren whispered. "For years and years, it worked. Right up until tonight." The silence that followed was a heavy thing. Lucian sat very still, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than before. "And her parents." Ren's gaze fell to the floor. "Gone," she said simply. "A long time now. And after they were gone, hiding was all she had left. It was the only thing they ever gave her that no one could take away." She drew a slow, shaking breath. So she kept hiding, because being invisible felt like the only way to stay safe. And being safe felt like the only thing she had ever truly been promised. The fire crackled softly in the grate. Lucian looked at her for a long, long moment, and when he rose from the chair, he did it slowly, the way a man moves around a wounded animal he does not wish to frighten. "You have carried this entirely alone," he said. It was not a question. Wren lifted her chin, and something fierce and frightened flickered behind her eyes. Carrying it alone was the only way to keep it safe, and it has cost you everything. His voice was very quiet now. Every friendship you could not keep, every door you closed before someone could look inside, every single day you spent pretending to be no one at all. Wren said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. Lucian stood there, a king who had chased a single thread of warmth on the wind for the better part of his life, and for the first time he understood exactly what he had been chasing. Not a scent. A person. A frightened, stubborn, extraordinary person who had spent her whole life being treated like an object, and had survived it by teaching the world to look away. Something in his chest ached in a way he did not have words for. "I never set out to hunt you," he said. "I want you to understand that. I told myself it was curiosity, a mystery I could not solve. But standing here now," he shook his head slowly, "I think part of me always knew that the scent was not a prize to be won. It was a question that deserved an answer. And the answer was a life. Yours." Wren stared at him. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever made the thing she was sound like something other than a target. And it terrified her, because for one dangerous heartbeat, she wanted to believe him. Garrick chose that moment to step forward, his expression grave. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "forgive me, but there is something you both should know, and I do not think it can wait." Lucian turned. "Speak." Garrick's eyes moved to Wren, and there was something almost like pity in them. "The story spread through the festival within minutes," he said. "A rare omega, hidden for years, revealed in the heart of the palace. By now, every noble in the kingdom has heard some version of it." He paused. "And not all of them heard it the way we would wish." Wren's stomach turned cold. "What do you mean?" Garrick hesitated, choosing his words with great care. "There are people," he said, "who make their living from rare things. People who buy and sell what should never be bought or sold. For years, there have been quiet rumors of such people moving along the edges of the territories, hunting, searching." His jaw tightened. "Searching for exactly the kind of scent that filled this corridor tonight." The warmth drained out of the room. "They are here?" Lucian asked, very low. "One of them may be." Garrick's voice was heavy. "There was a man in the crowd tonight. He did not whisper with the others. He did not gawk. He simply watched her. And the moment the word moonroot was spoken, something in his face changed." Wren's mouth had gone dry. "What did he look like?" she asked. "Tall, pale, cold in a way that did not reach his eyes." Garrick's gaze did not waver. "He goes by the name Royce Calder. He arrived only recently, with letters of introduction that do not quite hold up under a closer look. He claims to be a merchant of rare goods." Wren felt the floor tilt beneath her for the second time that night, because she had heard a name like that before, not the name itself, but the shape of it, the shadow of it, whispered between her parents in the dark, in the years before everything fell apart. A name that belonged to the people they had always been running from. The people who collected the rare and the wanted. The people who did not see a daughter, or a girl, or a name. Only a treasure to be taken. "He found me," she whispered. Her arms tightened around herself until it hurt. After all this time, the herbs failed for one single night, and he found me. "He has found nothing," Lucian said. But Wren shook her head, and the old terror rose up in her like a tide. "You do not understand. People like that, they do not stop. They do not lose interest. They wait. They watch. They take what they want and they make it disappear. And no one ever asks where it went because no one ever knew it was there to begin with." Her voice cracked. "That is why I hid. That is why I spent so long being no one. Because being no one was the only thing that ever kept me out of hands like his." The room had gone utterly silent, and then Lucian crossed the space between them. He did not touch her. He stopped just short, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, close enough that the faint last trace of her own scent stirred something deep and protective in his chest. "Listen to me," he said, and his voice, when it came, was no longer the tired voice of a man at the end of a long search. It was the voice of a king. "You spent your whole life believing that the only way to be safe was to be invisible, that the only way to survive being wanted was to make certain no one ever wanted you at all." His silver eyes burned. "But hear me now, Wren Calloway. That ends tonight. No one is going to make you disappear. Not him. Not anyone. Not ever again." Wren looked up at him, and her heart was a wild and frightened thing. She wanted to believe him. That was the most dangerous part. After a lifetime of trusting no one, of needing no one, of building her whole survival on the certainty that she could only ever rely on herself. A part of her, small and trembling and long buried, wanted to believe him. "You cannot promise that," she whispered. "No," he admitted. "Not yet." He stepped back, and the loss of his nearness left a strange ache in the air between them. "But I can promise you this," he said. "Tonight, for the first time in a very long time, you are not standing alone." Outside the tall windows, far below, the lanterns of the festival glowed on through the dark. And somewhere out there, beneath those same warm lights, a cold man with a patient smile was already making his plans. Because Royce Calder had spent a long time hunting rare and precious things, and he had just found the rarest of them all. Word of an unclaimed Omega does not stay quiet for long. By the time Lucian led Wren back toward the heart of the palace, the whole festival had changed its shape. The music still played. The lanterns still glowed against the dark. But beneath it all ran a new and restless current, the kind that moves through a crowd when something rare and valuable is suddenly known to be within reach. Every eye followed her now. Wren felt them like fingers trailing across her skin. She kept close to Lucian, her arms wrapped tight around herself, the torn pouch still clutched in one hand. Inside it, a few crushed leaves remained. Enough for one more morning. Enough, perhaps, to vanish one last time. Her fingers tightened around it like a lifeline thrown into deep water. That little pouch was the last thread connecting her to the only life she had ever managed to survive. As long as she held it, there was still a way out, still a door left open, still a path back into the safe gray nothing where no one could ever truly reach her. She did not yet understand how much she had come to need that open door. They had nearly reached the grand hall when a smooth voice rose above the music. "Your Majesty." The crowd turned as one. Royce Calder stepped forward from the gathering, a cup of dark wine held loosely in one hand, a smile resting on his face that never once climbed as high as his eyes. He moved with the easy, unhurried confidence of a man who had spent his whole life getting exactly what he wanted, and who had never once been told no. "What a remarkable evening this has become," he said. "The whole kingdom is speaking of nothing else." Lucian's expression did not so much as flicker. "Is it a hidden omega, the rarest of the rare, discovered in the very heart of the royal palace, of all the unlikely places?" Royce's gaze slid sideways to Wren, slow and deliberate, the way a man might study a jewel turned beneath a lamp. One does have to wonder how something so precious managed to go unnoticed for quite so long. Wren went cold all over. She knew that look. She had spent her entire life learning to flee from that exact look. It was not curiosity. It was not even desire. It was calculation. The quiet, patient arithmetic of a man deciding what a thing was worth and how he might acquire it. "She is under my protection," Lucian said quietly. "Of course she is." Royce inclined his head, the very picture of courtesy. "Though I feel I must point out, with the greatest possible respect, she is unclaimed, and an unclaimed treasure draws a great deal of interest." His smile widened by a careful fraction. "There are many in this kingdom, and far beyond its borders, who would gladly offer a king's ransom for nothing more than the chance to call such a rarity their own." A murmur rippled outward through the watching crowd, and Wren heard, beneath the polished words, exactly what Royce Calder was truly saying. She was a thing, a prize, a possession, a treasure to be bought or won, or simply taken in the night. The same thing she had always been in the eyes of every man like him. The walls of the grand hall seemed to lean inward, the eyes pressed closer, the whispers, the heat of so many bodies, the weight of so much attention after a lifetime spent making herself small. Her breath came short and fast, her vision blurred at the edges, and the oldest instinct she owned, the one her mother had carved into her very bones, rose up and began to scream. Hide, disappear, become no one at all before they can decide you are theirs. Her trembling fingers found the torn pouch. She pulled it open with shaking hands. She reached for the last of the crushed leaves, desperate to swallow them down, to pull the familiar mask back over herself, to slip once more into the safe and silent gray she had lived inside for as long as she could remember. Wren. Lucian's hand closed gently over hers. She froze. He did not grip her. He did not pull the pouch away. His hand simply rested over hers, warm and steady and certain, stilling the frantic motion of her fingers without forcing them. "Look at me," he said softly. She did not want to. Every part of her wanted to look anywhere else, but she did, and his silver eyes were not looking at her the way Royce looked at her. They held no calculation, no hunger to possess, They were not measuring her worth or weighing what she might be sold for or counting the ways she could be kept. They were looking at her like she was worth saving. "You have spent your whole life believing," he said, his voice low and meant for her alone, "that the only way to stay safe is to make the world forget that you exist." Her eyes filled. "It is the only thing that ever kept me alive." "I know." His thumb brushed once, slowly, across the back of her hand, and the touch sent a current straight up her arm and into her chest. "But hiding has not kept you alive, Ren. Not really. It has only kept you from ever truly living." She stared up at him, her heart a wild and frightened bird beating against the cage of her ribs. And then, slowly, deliberately, he reached down and took the torn pouch from her hand. "What are you doing?" she whispered. Lucian rose to his full height and turned to face the watching court. And before hundreds of staring eyes, before the nobles in their silk and the servants in their gray and the cold, smiling man who wanted to own her, he closed his fist around the last of the herbs and crushed them. The dried leaves broke apart between his fingers with a soft, final sound, like the closing of a door that would never open again. A faint, earthy scent rose into the air, bitter and green, the smell of all those long years of fear, of survival, of quiet and endless desperation. And then it faded. And beneath it, something else began to bloom. It started slowly, a warmth at first, soft and sweet, unfurling into the air like the very first light of dawn spilling over still water. Then it spread, deepening, filling the grand hall, reaching into every shadowed corner, impossible to mistake and impossible to ignore. Her scent, the true one, the one she had buried since she was 14 years old, whole, unguarded, loosed upon the world for the very first time. It moved through the room the way moonlight moves across a dark lake, silver and silent and utterly transforming. The entire court fell still. Several wolves went rigid where they stood, their heads turning toward her without their choosing it. Others let their eyes drift shut. The whispers died all at once, swallowed whole by something far older, far deeper, far more powerful than any gossip. Ren stood frozen at the center of it all, her last shield gone, her oldest secret laid utterly bare before the watching world. She had never felt so exposed in all her life. It was as though someone had stripped away not her clothing, but her every defense, the careful walls, the gray dresses, the lowered eyes. A lifetime of practiced nothing, gone in a single breath, scattered like ash on the wind. And Lucian Thornwood breathed her in, and the effect on him was immediate and undeniable and total. For so long he had chased this scent across mountain passes and through winter storms, always arriving too late, always reaching for a door that swung shut before his fingers could so much as graze it. And now it surrounded him completely, warm and alive and real, wrapping around him like something he had been starving for without ever knowing the name of his hunger. Every guarded thing inside him came undone at once. His pale eyes darkened. His breath turned rough in his chest. The careful, practiced stillness of a king cracked straight down the middle, and beneath it stood simply a man, undone to his very core by the nearness of the one thing he had searched a lifetime to find. The bond. It surged up between them like a rising tide, ancient and undeniable, a pull that neither of them had chosen, and neither of them had the power to refuse. Wren felt it too, a heat low in her chest, a tightening, a deep and aching tug, as if some invisible thread had been tied between her ribs and his, and the whole world was slowly drawing it taut. She felt herself being pulled toward him, as surely as the sea is pulled toward the moon. The very air between them seemed to hum. Her skin felt too warm. Her heart had begun to beat in a rhythm that was no longer entirely her own. It frightened her more than anything Royce Calder had said, because she could feel herself wanting to step closer, and wanting, in the whole long history of her life, had always been the single most dangerous thing in the world. "She belongs to no one," Lucian said. His voice rang out through the silent hall, rough at the edges, but certain to its core. Not to him. A single glance toward Royce, cold as winter steel. Not to any of you. She is not a prize to be purchased. She is not a treasure to be claimed. She is not a rare and lovely thing to be locked away in someone's keeping and brought out only to be admired. His silver eyes swept slowly across the room, daring any soul to argue. She is a person with a name and a life, and tonight the hiding ends. The court did not breathe. Royce's smile had vanished entirely. In its place was something flat and cold and quietly dangerous. The expression of a man who had just watched his prize lifted clean out of his reach. He said nothing. He did not need to. But his pale eyes moved from Lucian to Wren, and back again, and in them was a promise that this was very far from over. But Wren barely saw him, because her scent was everywhere now, and the bond was pulling, and every eye in the room was fixed upon her, and the walls were closing in, and it was all simply too much seen, too much known, too much wanting from too many people all at once, after a lifetime of being carefully, deliberately no one at all. Her breath broke apart in her chest, and the instinct that had ruled her for so long finally won. She ran. She did not decide to do it. There was no thought in it at all. Her body simply moved, the way a startled deer moves, the way a thing that has only ever survived by fleeing moves when the whole world turns its eyes upon it. She turned and fled through the parting crowd, past the staring nobles, out of the grand hall, and into the dim and winding corridors beyond. Her heart hammered. Her vision swam. Her carefully built world collapsed in pieces behind her with every step. Behind her, she heard her name. "Wren?" She did not stop. She ran until the music faded to a distant murmur, until the lanterns thinned to scattered points of light, until she reached a quiet stone terrace at the very edge of the palace, where the night air was cold and clean and blessedly empty. She gripped the iron railing with both hands and gasped at the darkness below, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to find her way back to the gray nothing she had lived inside for so very long. But it was gone. He had crushed it in his fist. She could not hide any more. "Wren," his voice came from behind her. Quiet now, careful, stripped of all its kingly command. She did not turn around. "Please, just leave me alone. I cannot do that." "Why not?" Her voice cracked clean in two. "Why can you not simply let me disappear, the way that everyone else in my whole life always has?" Footsteps, slow and soft against the cold stone. He stopped a few paces behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him at her back, close enough that the bond stirred once more, low and aching and alive. "Because you do not truly want to disappear," he said gently. "Not really. You only learned to want it because the people who should have kept you safe taught you that vanishing was the only way left to survive." Ren squeezed her eyes shut against the dark. "You crushed them. In front of everyone. You took the one single thing that ever kept me safe, and you destroyed it with your bare hand." "Yes. How could you do that to me?" "Because as long as you carried those herbs," he said, "you were never once going to stop running. You would have always kept one door open, one escape ready, one quiet way to slip out of the world the very moment it dared to look at you too closely." His voice grew softer still. "And I could not bear to watch you spend the rest of your life standing with one foot already out the door." She finally turned to face him. The moonlight caught the silver of his eyes and made them shine. The cold night wind moved between them, carrying her scent and his, tangled together in a way that made her chest ache with a longing she had no name for. "You do not even know me," she whispered. The same words she had spoken before. But this time they came out trembling. "Then let me," he said. He stepped closer, slowly, giving her every chance in the world to step away from him. She did not step away. "I am not asking for anything from you tonight," he said, low and steady. "Not your trust, not your heart, not your hand in mine. I know far better than to ask a frightened creature to simply stop being afraid." His gaze searched her upturned face. "I am only asking you to stop running long enough to see one thing. That the bond between us is not a cage. It does not have to be a chain. It never, ever has to be." The wind tugged gently at her loosened hair, and Ren felt it again, that terrible and wonderful pull, drawing her toward him like a tide she no longer had the strength to fight. "I can feel it," she admitted, her voice barely more than a breath on the wind. "The bond. I have felt it since the very moment our eyes met across that corridor. And it terrifies me down to my bones." "I know," he said. "I feel it too. My whole life, being wanted meant being owned." A single tear slipped free and traced its way down her cheek. "How am I supposed to want you back when wanting is the very thing I was taught to fear most in all the world?" Lucian closed the last of the distance between them. He did not pull her into his arms. He did not claim her, though the bond and every screaming instinct he possessed demanded that he do exactly that. Instead, he lifted one hand, slowly, so slowly, and brushed the single tear from her cheek with the gentlest touch she had ever known in her life. His fingers were warm against her cold skin. She shivered, head to foot. "Wanting is not the same thing as owning," he said, very low, his face close to hers. "I do not want to keep you, Ren. I want to know you. There is a world of difference between the two. And if you never once choose me, if you walk off this terrace tonight and slip away into the dark the way you always have, then I will let you go." His thumb traced softly along the line of her jaw. "Because a thing that is held against its will is not a treasure at all. It is only a prisoner, and I have spent my whole life despising the men who keep prisoners and call them prizes." Ren's breath caught hard in her throat. No one had ever offered her that. In all her 22 years, through all the running and the hiding and the endless, careful surviving, no one had ever once offered her the choice. For one long, trembling moment, the whole vast world narrowed down to the warmth of his hand against her face, the steady pull of the bond between them, the cold, clean bite of the night wind, and the sound of two hearts beating just slightly out of time with one another. She wanted to lean into him. She wanted it so badly that it frightened the breath right out of her. And that, precisely that, was the very reason she stepped back. "I cannot," she whispered. "Not tonight. I have kept myself alive for so long by trusting no one but myself. I do not know how to simply stop. I do not know how to believe that the ground will still be there beneath me if I ever let myself fall." Lucian let his hand drop slowly to his side. He did not reach for her again. "Then do not fall tonight," he said softly. "Just do not run. That is the only thing I will ask of you." The bond ached between them in the cold air, unfinished, unclaimed, and achingly alive. And Wren stood on the quiet stone terrace beneath the wide silver moon, torn straight down the middle of her own heart. Between the safety she had always known and the terrifying, beautiful, impossible pull of being, for the very first time in her entire life, truly and completely seen. Far below, in the deep shadows beneath the palace walls, a cold man stood watching a single lit window from the dark, and Royce Calder, who had just watched the prize he wanted most slip clean through his fingers, began very quietly and very patiently to plan exactly how he would take it anyway. Morning came soft and gray over Black Pine. The festival had burned itself out in the small hours, and now the palace lay quiet, draped in that strange stillness that follows a night when everything has changed. Wren had not slept. She sat by the window of the small room they had given her, watching the pale light creep across the rooftops, and she could still feel it. The bond. A low, steady warmth in her chest, like a cold that refused to go cold. Even now, even apart from him, she could feel the faint pull of Lucian Thornwood, somewhere within these same walls. It frightened her how quickly she had stopped fighting it. On the small table beside her sat a worn box wrapped in faded blue cloth. She had carried it with her through every move, every flight, every quiet vanishing of her whole life. She had not opened it in a long while. This morning, she did. Inside lay the few small things that remained of the life she had lost. A silver hair ribbon, a faded image of a smiling couple, and a bright-eyed little girl standing before a small house ringed with wildflowers, and a folded letter, the creases worn so soft they had begun to fade. Wren lifted the letter with careful fingers. Her mother's hand. She would have known it anywhere. She had read the words 100 times, 1,000, and still, this morning, they reached into her chest and closed around her heart. If you are reading this, then you are still safe. Promise me you will never feel ashamed of what you are. Hiding is not weakness. Surviving is not weakness. But hear me, my darling. There will come a day when the hiding is no longer the bravest thing you can do. One day, the right people will finally know your truth. Until that day comes, guard your heart and trust yourself. Wren read it through twice, then she folded it slowly and pressed it to her lips and let the tears come. For so long, those words had meant only one thing to her. hide, survive, wait. But this morning, sitting in the gray light with the bond humming in her chest, she heard something in them she had never heard before. There will come a day when the hiding is no longer the bravest thing you can do. Her mother had not written that letter to keep her hidden forever. She had written it to set her free. A knock came at the door, not the bright, easy knock of Tamsin, a heavier one. Wren wiped her eyes quickly and rose. When she opened the door, a young serving boy stood in the corridor, pale and trembling, a folded note clutched in both his hands. "For you, miss," he stammered. "A man gave it to me. He said to put it in no hand but yours." Wren took the note. Her fingers had gone cold. "What man?" But the boy was already gone, half running down the corridor, as if he wished to put as much distance between himself and that note as he possibly could. Wren closed the door and opened the note. The handwriting was elegant, precise, each letter formed with the care of a man who was never, ever in a hurry, because he had always been certain the world would wait for him. She read it once. Then she read it again, while the floor seemed to drop away beneath her feet. "A treasure such as you should not waste itself on a king who will tire of it. Come to me quietly, before the next moon rises. Tell no one. Bring no guards. Refuse. And the little friend who is always laughing, the one who dragged you out of your library, will learn what happens to those who shelter what does not belong to them. So will the boy who carried this note. So will every soul who has ever shown you a moment of kindness. You have always known how this ends. You run, or others pay. Choose well." There was no signature. There did not need to be. Wren sank slowly onto the edge of the bed, the note trembling in her hands, and the old terror rose up and swallowed her whole. Tamsin, bright, kind, laughing Tamsin, who had never once asked Wren why she hid, who had only ever offered her friendship and warmth and a hand pulling her toward the light. The boy who had carried the note, who had trembled just to hold it. Every soul who had ever shown her kindness. This was the thing she had run from her whole life, not just the danger to herself, the danger she brought to everyone near her. It was why she had never kept a friend, never stayed in one place, never let anyone love her, because loving her had always been dangerous. And now it had happened anyway. The very thing she had spent her whole life trying to prevent. For a long, terrible moment, the old answer rose up in her, clear and simple and certain. Run. Go to him quietly, the way the note demanded. Trade herself for their safety. Disappear into the dark, the way she always had, and let the people she cared for go on living their bright, ordinary lives, never knowing how close the shadow had come. It would be so easy. It was the only thing she had ever known how to do. Her hand was already reaching for her satchel when she stopped, because she heard her mother's voice. There will come a day when the hiding is no longer the bravest thing you can do. Wren went very still. She thought of all the times she had run before, and she understood suddenly, with a clarity that stole her breath, that running had never once made the danger go away. It had only ever moved it, from her to the next person, from this place to the next. She had spent her whole life calling herself a survivor. But a survivor who only ever runs leaves a trail of others to face what she would not. And if she ran to Royce now, quietly, alone, into the dark, she would not be saving Tamsin. She would only be teaching him that the threat had worked, that a single note could move her like a piece on a board. And men like that never stopped at one demand. They never released a treasure once they had it. They simply kept asking for more, and more, and more, until there was nothing left of you at all. Wren rose to her feet. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was a wild thing. Every instinct she owned was screaming the same old song. But for the first time in her entire life, she did not listen to it. She found Lucian in the study where he had first listened to her story. He turned the moment she entered, and the relief on his face was so plain, so unguarded, that it nearly undid her resolve. "You stayed," he said softly. "I stayed." Wren crossed the room and placed the note in his hand. "Read this." He read it, and as he did, the warmth drained from his face, and something cold and dangerous rose up to take its place. By the time he reached the end, his knuckles had gone white around the paper, and the air in the room felt charged, the way the air feels before lightning. "Royce Calder," he said quietly. It was not a question. "I think so." "Yes." Garrick, who had been standing near the window, stepped forward, his weathered face grim. "Then he has shown his hand sooner than I expected, and more openly." He looked at the note again. "He must be very confident, or very desperate." "He is both," Lucian said. "A man like that does not threaten children unless he believes he is going to win." Wren wrapped her arms around herself. "He expects me to come quietly, alone, the way I always have." Lucian looked at her, and there was a question in his eyes he did not speak aloud. She answered it anyway. "I am not going to," she said. The words came out quiet, but they did not tremble. "My whole life I ran. Every time the shadow came close, I left. I told myself I was protecting people by disappearing from their lives before the danger could find them." Her jaw tightened. "But I see it now. Running never stopped him. It never stopped any of them. It only ever passed the danger along to someone else. And I am done passing it along." Garrick studied her with something that looked almost like respect. "It will not be safe," he warned her gently. "Men like Calder do not lose gracefully. If you stand against him in the open, he will fight back, and he will not fight fair." "I know." "You could still leave," Garrick said, not unkindly. "His Majesty could send you somewhere far from here, somewhere protected, and deal with Calder himself. No one would think less of you." Lucian said nothing, but Wren saw the way he was watching her, not telling her what to do, not deciding for her, simply waiting with that same quiet patience to see what she would choose. It was the choice he had promised her on the terrace, the choice no one had ever given her before, and she made it. "No," Wren said. "If you fight him for me, and I hide while you do it, then nothing has changed. I will still be a treasure that other people fight over, a thing to be protected, or claimed, or won." She lifted her chin. "I have been that my whole life. I do not want to be that anymore." She looked at Lucian then, and her gray blue eyes were bright and fierce and frightened all at once. "I want to face him myself, with my own voice. I want him and everyone watching to understand that I am not a prize anyone gets to win. I am a person, and I am choosing this." For a long moment, Lucian did not speak. Then, slowly, he crossed the room to stand before her, and the bond stirred between them, warm and steady. "Then that is what we will do," he said. "Not me, claiming you. Not me, fighting your battle while you wait in the dark." His voice was low. "You, standing in the open, and me, standing beside you, as an equal, never above." Something in Wren's chest loosened that had been clenched tight for longer than she could remember. "Beside me," she repeated softly. "Always," he said. "If you will have it." The morning light strengthened at the windows, gold now, where it had been gray. Garrick cleared his throat. "Then if we are to do this, we must do it properly. Calder is clever. He will have prepared for many things." He moved to the table and began to lay out his thoughts, plain and practical. His letters of introduction do not hold up. The seals are wrong. The names he claims to know cannot be found. If we can prove, before witnesses, that he is not what he says he is, that he is a traitor in living beings who has come to this kingdom under a false name, then his threats become the desperate acts of a criminal and not the demands of a noble. "And the others he named?" Wren asked, her voice tight. "Tamsin, the boy. He threatened them. They will be watched, quietly, day and night, from this moment on," Lucian said. "Calder will not lay a finger on a single soul who has shown you kindness. I give you my word." Wren nodded slowly. It was a fragile thing, this plan. She could feel the danger in it, sharp and real. Royce Calder was patient and cruel, and he had spent his whole life winning. Standing against him in the open meant risking everything she had ever fought to keep. It meant the end of hiding, forever. And yet, as she stood there in the strengthening light, with the bond humming warm in her chest, and Lucian beside her, and her mother's words finally understood at last, she was not afraid in the old way. There would come a day, her mother had written, when the hiding is no longer the bravest thing you can do. Wren had spent her whole life believing that day would never come. She had been wrong. It had come. It was today. She picked up the worn letter once more, read the final line one last time, and pressed it gently into the box. Then she closed the lid, and she squared her shoulders, and she turned to face the two men who would stand with her. "All right," she said quietly. "Tell me what we need to do." Far across the city, in a borrowed room with the curtains drawn against the morning, Royce Calder waited for a frightened girl to come crawling to him in the dark. He was very good at waiting. He had no idea, not the faintest idea in the world, that the girl he had threatened was not going to run. She was going to come for him, in the open, with her own voice, and the whole kingdom watching. The court gathered beneath the great dome as the moon climbed toward its height. Word had spread the way word always does in a palace, passing from mouth to mouth, growing larger with every telling. The hidden Omega would face the stranger who claimed her. There would be a reckoning. And so they came, the nobles in their finest, the advisors, the merely curious, filling the wide hall until it seemed the very walls might strain to hold them, their whispers rising into the vaulted dark like smoke off a fire. Wren stood at the edge of it all, waiting to walk in. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Lucian stood beside her, close but not touching, giving her the space she had asked for. Garrick waited one step behind, a worn leather folder of papers held tight against his chest. Beyond the archway, the lantern light glowed gold across a sea of waiting faces. "You do not have to do this," Lucian said quietly. "Even now, there is no shame in finding another way." "There is, though," Ren said. "For me, there is." She drew a slow, unsteady breath. "I have run from rooms like this my whole life. Every time the danger came close, I found a door, and I used it. And if I run from one more, I will run from every room that comes after it, for the rest of my days." She looked up at him. "I am so tired of running." "Then we will end it," he said. "No." She shook her head gently. "Stay beside me, but let me speak. Whatever happens in there, let it be my voice that they hear. Not yours, not the crown's, mine." Something moved behind his silver eyes. Pride, perhaps, or something deeper and quieter than pride. "Your voice," he agreed. And Wren Calloway lifted her chin and walked into the light. The whispers died the moment she entered. Hundreds of faces turned toward her at once, and the old terror clawed its way up her spine, screaming at her to lower her eyes, to fold herself small, to slip back into the safe gray nothing where no one could truly see her. She felt the weight of every single stare. She felt the heat of the lanterns and the press of so many bodies, and the awful, naked exposure of being looked at. But she did not lower her eyes. She walked to the center of the great hall, to the place where the marble floor caught the falling moonlight, and there she stopped. And waiting for her, calm as still water, stood Royce Calder. He was dressed in fine dark clothes, every thread of them immaculate, and he wore his cruel and patient smile like a second skin pulled comfortably into place. He bowed to her, low and slow and mocking, as though the two of them shared a private secret the rest of the room had not yet been allowed to hear. "You came," he said, "though not at all in the manner I requested." His pale eyes flicked past her, to Lucian, to Garrick, to the crowded hall. "Bold of you. Foolish, very likely, but bold. I confess I did not expect it." "I came to end this," Wren said. "Oh, my dear." His smile spread wider. "So did I." And then he turned to face the assembled court, and his whole manner shifted in an instant. The mockery folded itself away. In its place rose something smooth and reasonable and terribly convincing. The voice of a patient man who had been deeply and unfairly wronged. "My lords, my ladies, your majesty." He spread his hands wide, palms open, the very picture of honesty. "I am grateful you have gathered here tonight, for there has been a grave misunderstanding in this place, and I would have the whole truth of it known, plainly, by every soul present." Wren felt the first cold thread of doubt slide into her chest. "This young woman," Royce went on, his voice warm with false sorrow, "has been presented to you as an innocent, a frightened creature, hidden away for her own protection, a victim of cruel men." He shook his head slowly, sadly. "But you have not been told the whole of the story. You have not been told what she truly is." He let the silence stretch out, long and heavy. "She is a runaway," he said, "bound, long ago, by a solemn debt that her family could not pay. Promised, spoken for, by their own hand. And when at last the time came to honor that promise, she did the very thing she has always done." His pale eyes swung back to find hers. "She ran. She lied. She hid herself away with rare and forbidden herbs, and she fled into the wide world, leaving honest people behind to bear the cost of her broken word. A murmur swept through the crowd like wind through dry grass. "I have papers," Royce said, and he drew a folded document from inside his coat. Sealed, aged, heavy with the weight of officialdom. He held it up so that all could see it. "Proof of the agreement," he said. "Proof of what she owes, and to whom. I have not come to this kingdom to claim a prize, my lords. I have come, at great expense and greater trouble, to collect a debt that is lawfully, rightfully, and honestly mine." He held the document high above his head, and the crowd began to turn. Wren felt it happen. She felt the whole room tilt slowly against her, the way a ship tilts when the cargo shifts, the sympathy in their faces curdling into doubt, the warmth cooling into suspicion, the whispers sharpening into something with teeth. "Is it true, do you think? A debt," he says, "sworn by her own family. Well, she did lie about what she was. She hid it for years. Forbidden herbs. Who does that, if not someone running from something?" The old terror rose up in her then, and it nearly drowned her where she stood, because this was the nightmare. This was the exact thing she had always known, in the deepest and most frightened part of her, would happen if she ever once stopped running. The world would look at her, and it would not see a person. It would see a thing that owed, a thing that lied, a thing that belonged, by right and by paper, to someone else. Her breath came short and ragged. Her vision narrowed at the edges until the hall seemed to swim, and her feet, all on their own, with a will she had spent her whole life obeying, shifted half a step back toward the door behind her. "Run!" Lucian moved at her side, drawing breath to speak, ready to step in front of her, ready to bring the full crushing weight of his crown down upon the lie and grind it into dust. And Wren reached out and stopped him with one trembling hand against his arm. "No," she whispered. "Mine. You promised. Remember?" He went still, and she made herself breathe. She made herself stay. She thought of her mother's letter, folded gently in its faded box. She thought of all the long, lonely years of empty rooms and borrowed names and the gray safety of being no one at all. She thought of Tamsin's bright and easy laugh and the trembling boy who had carried the cruel note, and every single person who would pay the price if she let this cold man win tonight. And something inside her, something that had been pressed flat and silent for far too long, slowly, painfully, began to rise. Wren lifted her head, and she found her voice. "That paper is a lie," she said. It came out quiet, but it carried to every corner of the hall. Royce's smile flickered, just slightly, at one edge. "I beg your pardon? You heard me," she said. And she took a step toward him, not away from him, toward him. "There is no debt. There is no promise. My family owed you nothing at all, because my family never once knew you existed." Her voice grew steadier with every word that left her. "You are not a wronged man come to collect what he is owed. You are a hunter. A man who buys and sells living souls as though they were no more than cattle at a market, and who dresses the whole filthy business up in wax and seals and pretty paper, so that no one in a room like this ever has to look directly at what you really are." The murmur of the crowd shifted again, the tide, just slightly, beginning to turn. Royce's eyes hardened to chips of pale ice. "Strong words," he said softly. From a girl with no proof of her own. Then let us speak of proof, Wren said, and she turned away from him to face the whole watching court, and for the first time in the entirety of her life, she did not try to make herself small before a crowd. She stood tall in the center of that great moonlit hall, and she let every one of them look at her, and she did not flinch from a single pair of eyes. You want to know what I am, she said. He has been only too happy to tell you. A debt, a liar, a runaway, a thing that rightfully belongs to someone else. Her voice rang clear and bright beneath the soaring dome. So now let me tell you what I truly am, and then you may decide for yourselves which of us to believe. The hall fell utterly silent. I am an Omega, Wren said. A rare one, the kind that men like him spend their entire lives hunting across the world. And from the very moment my scent first came to me, when I was no more than a child, I learned a hard and bitter lesson. That to people like Royce Calder, I would never once be a girl. I would never be a daughter, or a friend, or a person with a name and a heart and a life of her own. Her eyes burned hot, but her voice held firm. I would only ever be a treasure, a prize, a rare and lovely thing to be locked away and owned. She turned slowly, meeting eye after eye after eye. My parents did not hide me away because I had done something shameful, she said. They hid me because the world had taken one look at me and decided I was worth the taking. They taught me how to vanish because vanishing was the only thing that could keep men like him from putting me in a cage and calling it love. Her voice dropped lower, rawer, more honest than she had ever allowed herself to be. And so I have spent my whole life being no one at all, false names and empty rooms, and never once letting a single living soul get close enough to truly love me, because being loved by me has always been dangerous. A deep hush had settled over the entire court now. Even the candle flames seemed to lean in to listen. He calls all of that a debt, Wren said, and she raised her hand and pointed at Royce Calder, and her hand did not so much as tremble. He calls me a liar simply because I refused to be sold, but I owe that man nothing. No person owes another their own freedom. No person is ever born owing the world the right to own them. And then, she did the one thing she had feared most of all. She stopped holding herself in. For her whole life, she had pressed her own self down, with herbs and without them. A lifetime of instinct had taught her to dim her own light, to fold herself small, to bury the rare and wanted thing inside her so deep that even she had nearly forgotten it was there. Now, in front of the whole world, she let it go. She let her scent rise freely into the air. She let her full presence fill the hall to its very edges. She stood there in the silver pour of the moonlight, and she stopped, at long last, apologizing for taking up space in the world. And the change that swept through the room was immediate and undeniable and total. The wolves felt it first. Her scent bloomed through the great hall like moonlight spilling across the surface of a still dark lake, warm and alive and wholly, unmistakably hers. And it was not the scent of a victim. It was not the scent of a debt or a liar or a frightened thing waiting to be taken. It was the scent of a person who had finally, fully, arrived in her own life, strong, whole, unbroken, unafraid. Several nobles drew sharp breaths, The suspicion in their faces wavered, then cracked clean down the middle, then crumbled away to nothing at all. Because a wolf cannot lie with scent. And there was no fear in hers now, no guilt, no hiding, only the truth. And the truth, standing tall and unmasked in the center of that hall, was 1,000 times more powerful than any forged and folded paper clutched in a cruel man's hand. The papers, Garrick said into the ringing silence, stepping forward at last. He opened his worn leather folder and lifted its contents high for all to see. His Majesty charged me with examining the documents this man carries, and the very letters that first brought him into this kingdom. They are forgeries, everyone. His voice was hard as iron. The seals belong to noble houses that crumbled into dust a generation ago. The witnesses he names cannot be found anywhere in the land, for the simple reason that they were never real to begin with. He turned slowly, sweeping the crowd. This man is no merchant of fine goods. He is a trader in stolen lives, traveling beneath a name that is not his own. And the only true debt in this hall tonight is the one that he owes to every soul he has ever bought and sold like cattle. The crowd erupted, and Royce Calder's careful mask finally fell away. The smooth charm vanished in a heartbeat. The patient, calculating cruelty twisted into something raw and ugly and desperate. He saw, in a single terrible instant, that the whole room had turned against him, that his lie had collapsed into ruin, that the prize he had been so utterly certain of was slipping forever beyond his reach. And so, he did the thing that cornered men do. He lunged. It happened fast, faster than the eye could follow. He crossed the marble in 3 long, furious strides, his hand plunging into his coat and closing around something hidden there, his pale eyes fixed wild and burning upon Wren. If he could not have her, every line of his face screamed, then no living man ever would. The crowd screamed. Guards surged forward from the walls. Lucian moved like a bolt of lightning, a low snarl tearing itself from his chest, every instinct in his body roaring at him to throw himself between the danger and the woman he had searched a lifetime to find. But Wren was already moving. She did not run. For the first time in the whole of her life, faced at last with the very thing she had spent her whole life fleeing from. She did not run. She stepped into it. She caught his outstretched arm in both her hands, and she turned her body the way that fear and survival had drilled into her through 100 narrow escapes over a lifetime of flight, and she used his own headlong weight against him. Royce, who had fully expected a frightened girl to flinch and bolt for the door, found instead a woman who had nowhere left to run, and who had decided, at long and bitter last, simply to stand her ground. He stumbled. His balance broke. He went down hard against the cold marble, and the hidden blade he had drawn skittered uselessly away across the gleaming floor. The guards were upon him in an instant, but it was Wren who stood over him, not Lucian, not Garrick, not the guards in their armor. Wren. Breathing hard, trembling head to foot, fierce and frightened and entirely unbroken, she stood over the man who had spent his whole life hunting people like her, and she looked down at him without a single ounce of fear left in her eyes. "You came here tonight to collect a thing you believed you owned," she said, her voice shaking, but ringing clear. "But I was never a thing. I was never yours. I was never anyone's to begin with." She drew one deep and steadying breath. "I am a person. My name is Wren Calloway, and I am the one, the only one, who decides what becomes of my life. Not you. Not ever again." Royce stared up at her, pinned and beaten on the floor. And for the very first time, the cold patience drained out of his pale eyes and gave way to something small and ordinary and human. Fear. He had spent his entire life certain that everything in the world had a price. And he had finally, at last, met something that did not. "Take him," Lucian said quietly. The guards hauled Royce Calder to his feet and dragged him from the hall, and his forged papers were swept up as evidence of every life he had ever bought and sold, and the great dome rang and rang with the sound of 100 voices rising all at once. But Wren barely heard a word of it. She stood alone in the center of the moonlit floor, her chest heaving, her scent still bright and free and unhidden in the air all around her. And slowly, slowly, the full truth of what had just happened began to settle over her like falling snow. She had not run. She had not hidden. She had not stood waiting in the dark for someone braver to come and save her. For the first time in the entire course of her life, she had walked into the open with her own face and her own scent and her own voice. And she had saved herself. Lucian came to her side then. He did not reach for her. He did not touch her. He simply stood close, the bond between them warm and steady and alive. And he looked at her in a way that no one in all her years had ever once looked at her before. Not the way a man looks at a treasure he has finally won. The way a man looks at a person he deeply admires. "You did that," he said softly. "Not me. Not the crown. You." Wren turned to him, and her eyes were wet and shining, and a laugh broke loose from her chest that was half a sob, the sound of a lifetime of fear cracking open all at once and falling away to nothing. "I did, didn't I?" she whispered. "You did." And all around them, the great court that had gathered to watch a rare treasure be claimed discovered that it had instead been witness to something far rarer still. A woman who had spent the whole of her life being told that she was a thing to be owned had stood up in front of the entire watching world and proven beyond all doubt that she belonged to no one on this earth but herself. The moon poured its clean silver light down through the great glass dome, and Wren Calloway, unhidden and unafraid at last, lifted her face to meet it, and did not look away. The great hall had not yet stopped ringing. The guards were gone, and Royce Calder with them, dragged out into the dark with his forged papers and his ruined lies. The crowd still murmured, still stirred, still tried to make sense of what their eyes had shown them. And in the center of it all stood Wren. Her scent hung soft and bright in the air, no longer a secret, no longer a shame. Her heart still beat too fast. Her hands still trembled at her sides. But something in her had changed, and she could feel it. The way you feel the air change after a long storm finally breaks. She had stood her ground. She had not run. And the world had not ended. Lucian stood beside her, close and quiet, the bond warm between them. The court watched the two of them with open curiosity now, waiting, the way crowds wait when they sense that the night is not yet finished. And then, the Alpha King did something no one in that hall had ever seen a king do. He stepped in front of her, and slowly, deliberately, in full view of every noble and servant and advisor gathered beneath the dome, he lowered himself to one knee, A gasp swept the hall like wind across water. Garrick's mouth fell open. Several nobles drew back as if they could not believe their own eyes. A king did not kneel, not to anyone, not in private, and certainly never ever in public before a watching crowd. Yet, there he was, Lucian Thornwood, the strongest wolf in the kingdom, the man feared by allies and rivals alike, kneeling on the cold marble before a girl in a plain gray dress, looking up at her as though she were the only thing in the world worth looking at. "Your Majesty," someone whispered, scandalized. "You cannot—" He ignored them. His silver eyes never once left her face. "For 8 years," Lucian said, and his voice carried clear and steady through the breathless hall. "I chased a scent across this kingdom. I told myself it was a mystery, a question I could not leave unanswered. I crossed mountains and winter storms chasing something I could not name, and I never once stopped, because I am a man who does not stop." A faint, tired smile touched his mouth. "I thought I was searching for a thing." He paused. "I was wrong," he said. "I was searching for you." Wren's breath caught hard in her throat. "And tonight," he went on, "I learned your name. I learned your story. I learned that while I spent all those years searching for you, you spent those same years trying to survive a world that wanted to own you. I learned that you were hunted and frightened and alone, and that you built a whole life out of being invisible, simply because being seen had only ever brought you danger." The hall was utterly silent now. "You believed," Lucian said softly, "that disappearing was the only way to stay safe, that to be wanted was to be caged, that your value made you a target, and nothing more." His voice grew rougher. "But I want you to hear something, Wren Calloway, and I want every soul in this hall to hear it with you." He drew a breath. "You are not valuable because you are rare," he said. "A man like Calder believed that. He believed your worth was a price, something to be measured and bought and owned. He was wrong, the way every man like him has always been wrong. You are valuable because you are a person, the same as every soul in this room, no more and no less. And no person, however rare, however common, however plain or precious the world decides they are, no person should ever have to spend their life hiding or bowing or shrinking themselves down out of fear of being seen." A strange thing happened then throughout the hall. The nobles, who had come to watch a treasure be claimed, lowered their eyes, not in scorn, in shame, as if each of them had glimpsed in his words, every time they had ever looked at another living soul and seen only worth or use or beauty or price, and never once seen the person standing inside. "I do not kneel because you are rare," Lucian said. "I kneel because you are brave, because tonight you did the hardest thing a frightened person can ever do. You stopped running, you stood in the open, and you let the world see you exactly as you are." He extended his hand. "Not as a king commands, not as a man claims, simply as one person, offering trust to another." "I am not asking you to belong to me," he said quietly. "I will never ask that. I am asking you to stand beside me as your own person, with your own name and your own voice, and the freedom to walk away from me any day you choose." His hand stayed open between them. "Not because I have caught you, because for the first time in your life, you are free to choose." Wren stared down at his open hand. and the whole hall held its breath. She had run from rooms like this her whole life. She had trusted no one, needed no one, leaned on no one but herself. The fear was still there, buried deep in her bones, whispering its old and familiar song. But beneath the fear, this time, was something new. She thought of her mother's letter, folded gently in its faded blue box. One day, the right people will finally know your truth. She had read those words 1,000 times and heard them only one way, as a promise of some far-off, impossible future. A day that would never truly come. But the day had come. It was here, and the right person was kneeling in front of her, with the whole world watching, asking nothing of her but the freedom to stand at her side. Until that day comes, her mother had written, guard your heart and trust yourself. She had guarded her heart for a lifetime. Now, at last, she trusted herself enough to open it. Slowly, she lifted her hand, and she placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and gentle, and the bond between them, no longer feared, no longer fought, settled into place like a key turning softly in a lock. Not a chain, not a cage. A choice, freely made, by a woman who had finally been given the right to make it. The hall erupted. Applause crashed against the great dome and rolled outward through the corridors. Smiles broke across 100 faces. Even the nobles who had doubted her, who had turned against her at Royce's first clever lie, found themselves clapping, swept up in something larger than themselves. And in the very back of the hall, a familiar voice cut through the roar. "I knew it!" Tamsin cried, laughing and crying both at once, pushing her way to the front. "I always knew there was someone in there worth seeing." Wren laughed, the sound breaking out of her like sunlight through clouds, and the last of the fear loosened its grip on her heart. Lucien rose to his feet, her hand still held in his, and for a moment the two of them simply stood there, in the silver pour of the moonlight, while the kingdom celebrated around them. He leaned close so that only she could hear. "You are shaking," he murmured. "I know," she whispered back. "I have never let this many people look at me in my whole life." "And how does it feel?" Wren considered that. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the applause, at the bright lanterns and the great dome, and the moon shining down through the glass. And for the first time, she did not feel like prey beneath 100 hungry eyes. She felt seen. "Terrifying," she admitted. A breath, a small, wondering smile. "And wonderful," both at once. Lucian's thumb brushed gently across her knuckles. "That," he said softly, "is what it feels like to be alive." In the days that followed, the world did not become easy. Wren had spent her whole life learning to hide, and a person does not unlearn a lifetime in a single night. There were mornings when she woke with her heart pounding, certain she had stayed too long, certain it was time to pack and run. There were moments in crowded rooms when the old instinct rose up and screamed at her to lower her eyes and disappear. But she did not run. Each morning, she stayed. And slowly, day by day, the staying grew easier. The bitter herbs were gone, and she did not make more. She let her true scent move freely through the halls, and though it turned heads at first, the wonder soon faded into something ordinary, the way all things do. People grew used to her. They began to greet her by name. The serving girl who had once melted into every shadow now walked through the palace in the full light of day, and the world, she discovered, did not devour her for it. It simply let her be. Tamsin appointed herself Wren's first true friend and would hear no argument about it. All those years, Tamsin scolded her one bright morning as they walked together through a garden heavy with late blooms. All those years you sat in that dusty library and let me think you were only shy. And the whole time you were hiding from hunters. She shook her head. You could have told me. I would have helped. That was exactly why I could not tell you, Wren said gently. Anyone who helped me was in danger. That was the whole point. That was the cage. She turned her face up to the warm light. Loving me was dangerous, so I never let anyone do it. Tamsin was quiet for a moment. And now? She asked. Wren thought about Lucian, about the bond, warm and steady and freely chosen, about a king who had knelt before the whole world and asked for nothing but the right to stand beside her. Now, she said softly, it is only loving me, nothing more, and it turns out that is not dangerous at all. The thing that surprised her most was what she chose to do with her freedom. She could have rested. She could have let the palace fold around her like a soft blanket, safe at last, done with fear forever. She did not, because Wren Calloway had not forgotten what Royce Calder was, nor the others still out there, hidden and frightened and alone, who had never once been given the choice she had been given. The first of them arrived on a cold morning not long after, brought quietly to the palace by Garrick's people. A girl, younger than Wren had been when the running started, with hollow eyes and a small cloth pouch clutched white-knuckled against her chest. Wren knew that pouch. She knew the smell of it. She knew the way the girl flinched from the open windows and chose, without thinking, the chair nearest the door. Wren did not tower over her. She knelt the way Lucian had once knelt, so their eyes were level. You can keep the herbs as long as you need them, she said gently. No one here will take them from you, but I want you to know something. She drew her own old pouch from her pocket, the last one, empty now, and set it on the table between them. There came a morning when I did not reach for mine, and the sky did not fall. And the world looked at me and let me stay. The girl stared at the empty pouch for a long time. Then, slowly, she set her own beside it. Not yet open, not yet gone. Just set down for a moment in the company of someone who understood. It was enough. It was a beginning. And one by one, others would come after her. Wren kept her mother's letter always. She had read it 1,000 times in fear, in those long hiding years, hearing only its promise of safety, its instruction to disappear. But she read it differently now. She understood at last what her mother had truly been trying to give her. Not a life spent hidden, a life worth coming out of hiding for. One evening, as the season turned and the air grew cool and the first lanterns of a coming festival began to glow across the city, Wren stood at a high window and watched the lights come alive below. Lucian came to stand beside her. He did not crowd her. He never did. He simply stood close, the bond warm and quiet between them, and looked out at the same lights she was watching. Once a night like this would have terrified me, she said softly. All those people, all those eyes. I would have locked myself in the library and prayed for it to end. And tonight? Wren smiled, and there was nothing tired in it now. The weariness that had once aged her face beyond her years had faded. She looked, at last, like what she was, a young woman of 22, standing in the light, unafraid. "Tonight," she said, "I think I would like to dance." Lucian laughed, low and warm and surprised. "Then we will dance," he said. She turned to him. "You did not claim me," she said. It was not quite a question. "That night, in front of everyone, you could have. The bond was there. Your every instinct must have screamed at you to take it. But you knelt, and you offered me a choice instead." She studied his face. "Why?" Lucian was quiet for a moment. "Because I spent my whole life watching powerful men take what they wanted," he said at last, "and calling it their right. I watched them collect rare things, and lovely things, and people, and I told myself that a true king was different, that a true king protected instead of taking." His silver eyes met hers. "And then I spent so long chasing you. And somewhere in those years, I understood that protecting you was not the same as letting you choose, that a cage built out of love is still a cage." He lifted her hand and pressed it gently to his chest, over the steady beat of his heart. "I did not want to win you, Ren. I wanted you to want to stay. There is all the difference in the world between the two." Ren felt her eyes sting. She had spent her whole life being wanted in the wrong way. And here, at last, was someone who wanted her in the right one. "My mother wrote me a letter," she said softly, "before she died. She told me that one day the right people would know my truth. I thought she meant it as a comfort, a pretty lie to help a frightened girl get through the dark." She breathed out slowly. "But she meant it. She was right. The day came, and the right person was kneeling in front of me, asking me to choose." She turned her face back to the lights below. Somewhere in those streets, a girl with hollow eyes was learning to walk past an open window without flinching. Somewhere in the palace, Tamsin was no doubt laughing at something. And here, beside her, stood a man who had knelt before the whole world, not to claim her, but to set her free. She had spent so long believing there were only two doors: hide and live unseen, or be seen and be owned. No one had ever told her there was a third. She had to find it herself, in a moonlit hall, with her own voice. And now she stood inside it. "And now?" Lucian asked quietly. Ren looked out at the gathering light, and she found that the answer came without fear, without hesitation, without a single old instinct whispering at her to plan an escape. "Now," she said, and her voice was clear and warm and entirely her own. "I am Ren Calloway, and I am not hiding from anyone, not ever again." The lanterns rose into the darkening sky, one after another, like stars deciding to come down and walk among the people, and the girl who had once counted the corners of every room for the quickest way out no longer looked for the door at all. She lifted her face to the rising moon. She did not lower her eyes. She did not make herself small. She simply stood there, whole and seen and unafraid, in the warm spill of 1,000 lights, with a hand held in hers that she had chosen, freely, to hold. The music drifted up from the festival below. Lucian offered his arm, and this time, without a moment's hesitation, Ren took it, and she stepped out, at last, into a life lived fully in the light.